Picture a lone woman standing in a dusty field, the wind tugging at her dress as the sun dips low. Now picture her gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a house full of secrets and a town full of fear. This is the true story of Alma Creed, a mystery so strange, so terrifying, it's never been solved. We're heading to the flat, lonely plains of Oklahoma, to a speck of a place called Dust Hollow in the summer of 1953. I've sifted through the old papers, the rumors, and the chills to bring you this tale. And trust me, it's not one you've stumbled across before. This isn't just a ghost story. It's real, it's raw, and it's about to sink its claws into you. Let's jump in, because the shadows are stretching long. Dust Hollow was a quiet dot on the map back then, a handful of farms scattered across the dry, cracked earth. Folks there kept to themselves, raising cattle and corn under a big empty sky. Alma Creed was one of them, a tough, wiry woman in her 30s, living alone in a weathered farmhouse 2 miles outside town. She'd inherited the place from her pa, a gruff old man who died years back. Alma was a loner, strong and sharp, with dark hair and eyes that saw right through you. Neighbors liked her well enough, but they didn't pry. She'd wave from her porch, tend her chickens, and keep the world at arm's length. That summer, though, something shifted. People started noticing odd things about Alma's place. At dusk, faint cries drifted over the fields, not loud but piercing, like a wounded animal or a woman in pain. Farmers driving by saw lights flickering. In her windows, not steady lampglow but quick jittery flashes, like something moving fast inside. One kid, a boy named Jimmy Tate who delivered eggs, told his ma, "Miss Alma's acting funny. She looks scared and her house smells like wet dirt." Folks figured she was just tired, maybe sick. They were wrong. It all came to a head-on. July 14th, 1953. Alma didn't show up at the weekly market, a rare miss for her. By noon, a neighbor, Hank Grayson, got worried and drove out to check. He found her truck parked crooked by the barn, keys still in it. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. Inside, the house was a mess. Chairs tipped over, a plate of half-eaten cornbread on the table, a lantern smashed on the floor. Alma was gone. No note, no tracks, no sign she'd packed to leave. Just an eerie stillness and that damp, earthy smell Jimmy had mentioned. Hank called the sheriff, a big man named Roy Teller, who rolled up with 2 deputies. They searched the house top to bottom. The bed was unmade, a quilt trailing onto the floor. In the kitchen, a kettle sat cold on the stove, water still inside. Out back, the chicken coop was busted open, feathers everywhere, but the birds were missing. Not dead, just gone. The strangest find was scratches, deep, jagged marks gouged into the wooden walls, too high for a person to reach without a ladder. Sheriff Teller told the Dust Hollow Dispatch, "Looks like she left in a hurry," or "Something took her." Word spread fast, and Dust Hollow buzzed with fear. A posse of farmers and townsfolk combed the fields, shouting Alma's name into the wind. They checked the barn, the creek, the old well. Nothing. Then, as the sun sank, they heard it. A wail, thin and sharp, rising from the earth near her house. It wasn't wind or coyotes. It was human, desperate and close. They dug where it seemed loudest, tearing at the dirt with shovels, but found only rocks and roots. The wails stopped, leaving them pale and shaking. That night, the lights came. Folks saw them from town, pale, bluish glows floating over Alma's fields, bobbing like lanterns with no one holding them. They drifted slow, then darted fast, vanishing into the dark. A widow named Clara Boone, who lived closest, swore she saw a figure in her yard, a tall, blurry shape with long arms, standing still as stone. "It watched me," she told the dispatch. Then it was gone, like smoke. The lights and the figure kept showing up night after night, turning Dust Hollow into a ghost story. The sheriff called in help, state troopers, a tracker with dogs. The dogs sniffed Alma's scarf, then whined and refused to move, tails tucked tight. Troopers found more scratches outside, etched into the barnwood and a patch of ground by the porch that sank soft under their boots like it had been freshly turned. They dug again, nothing but dirt, cold and wet. A trooper named Ed Mills wrote in his log, "Feels like the land's hiding her. Something's off here, way off." The weirdness didn't stop with Alma gone. Her house sat empty, but neighbors heard noises, bangs, scrapes, that same wail echoing from inside. Kids dared each other to peek through the windows, coming back with tales of shadows sliding across the walls. In '55, a hunter named Pete Walsh camped near the farm and woke to his gear scattered, his tent slashed, and blue lights circling him. He bolted, leaving his rifle behind. Found later stuck upright in the dirt like a marker, a reporter from Tulsa, a bold woman named Ruth Hayes, arrived in '57 to dig up the truth. She interviewed everyone, Hank, Clara, Sheriff Teller, piecing together a story too eerie to publish. In her notebook, later donated to a library, she wrote, "Alma didn't leave. Something took her, something old, alive and angry under that ground." Ruth stayed overnight at the farm, camera ready. She snapped photos of the lights, blurry blue orbs hovering low. Her last entry read, "Heard the wail up close. It's her voice, Alma's, calling my name. I'm out tomorrow." She vanished. That night, her car left by the road, film still in the camera. Decades passed, but Alma's mystery lingered. People kept disappearing near that farm, a hitchhiker in '63, a surveyor in '79, always at night, always with those lights glowing. In 1985, a teen with a tape recorder caught something, Alma's voice, faint and broken, saying, "Help me, it's cold." The tape aired on a local station, then disappeared from their vault. The house rotted away, boards collapsing, but the land stayed alive with whispers. Today, dust hollows a shell, half the farm's abandoned, the rest clinging on. Alma's place is just a field now, marked by a crumbling chimney. But the stories don't fade. Truckers see lights dancing over the plains. Campers hear cries. On still nights, in 2012, a drone flew over and caught footage. Blue glows rising from the dirt, forming a shape like a woman reaching up. No one's claimed it since. The official word? Alma Creed ran off, case closed, but no tracks, no body, no proof. The lights, the wails, the scratches, they're still there, caught in photos, tapes, and terrified tales. Experts say it's gas flares or wind tricks. Locals call it a haunting, a trap in the earth. Me, I've read the files, the faded news, the frantic notes from Ruth. I think something grabbed Alma that night, something deep, dark, and waiting. What happened to Alma Creed? Where'd she go? The truth's buried in Dust Hollow, locked in the ground with whatever's crying out there. Maybe it's waiting for the next woman, the next soul, the next fool to stand too close. Could be you out in that field, hearing your name in the wind. Will you run or will you vanish too? This is the disappearance of Alma Creed, an unsolved mystery that's real, raw, and rusting in the plains of Oklahoma. Sleep tight, because those lights don't stop. They're out there, right now, calling for someone new. Imagine clocking in for the night shift at a creaky old mill, the air thick with dust and the hum of machines. Now imagine the lights flickering, the air turning ice cold, and your co-workers disappearing one by one into the dark. This is the true story of the night shift at Gray's Mill, a mystery so strange, so terrifying, it's never been solved. We're heading to rural Maine, to a forgotten town called Ashwick, in the winter of 1946. I've dug through the archives, the whispers, and the fear to bring you this tale, and trust me, it's not one you'll find anywhere else. This isn't just a spooky story. It's real, it's raw, and it's about to grab you by the throat. Let's dive in, because the night's closing in fast, Ashwick was a sleepy little place back then, nestled between snowy pines and a frozen river. The heart of the town was Gray's Mill, a big, hulking building of brick and steel where folks worked long hours spinning cotton into thread. It ran day and night, keeping the town alive. The night shift was the toughest, cold, quiet and lonely, but the pay was good, so people showed up. In November of '46, though, that shift turned into a nightmare no one saw coming. It all started with the workers. The night crew was small, just 10 people, hard-working types who knew the mill inside out. They'd punch in at midnight, fire up the looms, and keep things running till dawn. But that fall, they started talking about weird stuff. Machines would stop on their own, then start again with no one touching them. Shadows moved in the corners, tall and thin, where the dim lights didn't reach. And the noises, low moans, like wind through the pipes, but sharper, almost human. One worker, a tough gal named Edith Pike, told her sister, "It's like the mill's alive at night. I don't trust it no more." The crew brushed it off at first. Old buildings creak, they said. Tired minds play tricks. But on November 19th, everything changed. That night was bitter cold, the kind that freezes your breath in the air. The 10 workers clocked in as usual. Edith, a wiry guy named Roy Tanner, a quiet kid called Billy Dunn, and 7 others. They settled into their spots, the clatter of looms filling the big drafty room. By morning they were gone. All of them. Not a soul came back up. The day shift arrived at 6, expecting to take over. Instead, they found silence. The mill was still. No hum, no clank, just a heavy quiet that made their skin prickle. The looms sat empty, threads dangling like spider webs. Tools were scattered on the floor, coffee cups half full on tables, coats still hanging by the door. It looked like the crew had stepped away for a second, except they hadn't. The time clock showed they'd punched in, but there was no sign of them anywhere. Word flew through Ashwick like wildfire. Families rushed to the mill, shouting names. Edith, Roy, Billy. But the building swallowed their cries. The foreman, a gruff man named Harold Gray, sent a search party inside. They combed every inch, upstairs, downstairs, the basement with its dripping pipes. Nothing, just dust and shadows. Then they noticed the fog. A thick grey haze hung low in the mill, clinging to the floor like smoke. It wasn't there when the night shift started, and no one could explain it. One searcher, a mechanic named Joe Cobb, told the Ashwick Herald, "It smelled wrong, like damp earth and something sour. Made my eyes sting." The searchers pushed deeper into the weaving. Room where the big looms stood like giants. That's when they heard it. A faint tapping, slow and steady, coming from the walls. Tap, tap, tap. They grabbed hammers, thinking someone was trapped. They smashed at the bricks, but found only solid stone. The tapping stopped, replaced by a sound that froze them. A giggle, high and quick, echoing from nowhere. Joe said, "It wasn't human. No way something alive laughs like that." By noon, the state police rolled in, flashlights cutting through the fog. They checked the machines, cold and untouched since midnight. They tested the air, no gas, no leaks. But that fog wouldn't lift. It swirled thicker, curling around. Their legs like fingers. A cop named Officer Dan Mills wrote in his report, "Felt watched the whole time. Something's in there and it don't want us poking around." They sealed the mill off, calling it a crime scene, but they had no clues, no bodies, no answers. That night, the strangeness spilled outside. Folks in Ashwick saw lights flickering inside the locked mill, yellow and shaky, like candles in the windows. They glowed for hours, then winked out. A fisherman by the river swore he heard voices calling from the water, names of the missing, faint and pleading. "Edith, Roy, help us." He ran home, pale as death, and wouldn't fish again. The next night, a dense fog rolled off the mill grounds, blanketing the town. Dogs whimpered, kids cried, and old-timers said it was a curse waking up. The mill's owners blamed a freak accident. Maybe a boiler blew, they said, or the workers wandered off drunk. But that didn't hold water. No explosion, no damage, and these weren't drinkers. They were steady folks with kids to feed. The Herald ran a story. 10 vanish in night shift horror. What took them? Families begged for truth, but the company paid them hush money and boarded up the mill tight. Still, people kept disappearing. A month later, a teenage boy, Tommy Hale, sneaked in on a dare. His buddies waited outside, counting minutes. He didn't come back. They found his flashlight by the looms, still on, batteries fresh. In 52, a drunk logger staggered into the mill for shelter. Gone by morning, his hat left behind. Every few years, someone else vanished near those bricks. Always at night, always with that fog creeping in. A reporter from Portland, a sharp guy named Carl Voss, showed up in 48 to crack the case. He talked to everyone, workers, cops, widows, building a file thick with notes. He wrote, "Gray's Mill isn't empty. Something's alive in there. Something old, hungry, and tied to that night." Carl stayed late one shift recording sounds with a bulky tape machine. He caught whispers, scratchy, overlapping voices saying, "Stay, join us." The tape cut off with a scream, his scream. They found his car outside, engine running, his notes scrawled with one last line, "The fog's got eyes." Today, Gray's Mill sits rotting, windows smashed, walls crumbling into the earth. Ashwick's half abandoned, a ghost town clinging to life. But the stories don't die. Truckers on Route 9 see lights in the mill at night, flickering, yellow, alive. Hikers hear tapping from the woods, giggles on the wind. In 1990, a ghost hunter snuck in with a camera. His footage, shaky and grainy, shows fog swirling and in one frame, faces, pale and blurry, staring back. He bolted, swearing he'd never return. The official line. A malfunction killed the night shift, bodies lost in a collapse, but no wreckage, no graves. The fog, the lights, the voices, they're still there, caught in photos, tapes, and terrified. Whispers. Experts call it tricks of weather or echoes in the brick. Locals say it's the dead, trapped and angry. Me? I've read the reports, the faded headlines, the desperate letters from families. I think something woke up that night in 46, something that feeds on the dark, the quiet, the night shift. What happened to Edith, Roy, Billy and the rest? Where'd they go? The truth's locked in Gray's Mill, hiding in the fog with whatever's giggling down there. Maybe it's waiting for the next worker, the next fool, the next night shift. Could be you stepping inside, hearing your name in the haze. Will you run or will you vanish too? This is the night shift at Gray's Mill, an unsolved mystery. That's real, raw and rusting in the woods of Maine. Sleep tight, because that tapping doesn't stop. It's out there right now, calling for someone new. Picture this, a tiny coal town tucked deep in the hills of Kentucky, swallowed by dark woods and forgotten by time. The year is 1937, and something awful is brewing in Hollow Ridge. A mystery so strange, so terrifying, it's never been solved. Welcome to the true story of the vanishing that still haunts those hills today. I'm digging into the files, the rumors and the nightmares to bring you this tale. And trust me, it's not one you've heard before. This isn't your typical ghost story. This is real, raw and ready to crawl under your skin. Let's get started, because the clock's ticking and the shadows are closing in. Hollow Ridge wasn't much to look at back then, just a cluster of wooden shacks, a rickety church, and a coal mine that burrowed into the earth like a hungry mouth. About 200 folks lived there, tough people who worked hard and kept quiet. The mine was their lifeblood, pulling black gold from the ground to feed families and heat homes. But in late November of 37, that lifeblood turned sour, and what happened next left the town and history reeling. It started with the miners. They were a gruff bunch, used to the dark and the danger. But something spooked them that fall. Reports trickled out. hushed and frantic, about odd things down in the tunnels. Men heard whispers, soft, scratchy voices echoing from the walls, saying words they couldn't catch. Others saw flickers of light, pale and wobbly, darting through the pitch-black shafts where no lanterns burned. One guy, a wiry fella named Hank Grayson, swore he felt cold fingers brush his neck while he worked alone. He told the town paper, the Hollow Gazette, "It ain't natural down there no more, something's watching us." The miners tried to shrug it off. Superstition, they said, tired eyes playing tricks, but then the disappearances began, and no one could explain them away. On November 22nd, a crew of 12 went down for the night shift. Normal guys, strong and steady, with families waiting up top. They never came back. The whistle blew at dawn, signaling the shift's end, but the lift stayed empty. No shouts, no signals, nothing, just silence from the deep. Word spread fast and the town panicked. A rescue team, 10 men armed with picks and lanterns, rushed into the mine. They found the crew's tools scattered near a narrow tunnel, one freshly dug that wasn't on any map. Coal dust hung thick in the air, and the walls glistened wet, like the earth was sweating. But the miners? Gone. No bodies, no blood, no sign of a fight. Just their gear, left behind like they'd dropped it and walked away or been taken. The rescue team searched for hours, calling out names. Jim Carter, Pete Walsh, Hank Grayson, all 12 echoing into the dark. Then they heard it, a low hum rising from the tunnel's end. It wasn't machinery or wind. It was voices, dozens of them, muttering fast and furious. The men froze, lanterns shaking in their hands. One guy, a young miner named Tommy Reed, later told the Gazette, "It sounded like a crowd down there, whispering secrets, made my blood turn cold." They ran back up, swearing they'd never go down again. By noon, the company sent in experts, geologists, engineers, even a preacher to pray over the hole. They checked for gas leaks, cave-ins, anything logical. Nothing added up. The mine was stable, the air clean. But those whispers kept coming, louder now, spilling out of the shaft like a warning. Folks gathered topside, clutching coats against the wind, watching the mine entrance as if it might swallow them too. And then the light started. That night, glowing orbs, small, white and wobbly, floated up from the woods near the mine. They bobbed like fireflies, but it was too cold for bugs, and these didn't blink out. They drifted over the tracks, the shacks, the church, silent and eerie. Kids screamed, dogs howled, and grown men crossed themselves. A widow named Clara Boone told anyone who'd listen, "It's the dead. They're lost and looking for us." The lights kept coming, every night, for weeks. The company shut the mine down fast, calling it a tragic accident. They paid off families, hushed up workers, and bolted the entrance with steel. But that didn't stop the mystery or the terror. People started vanishing from Hollow Ridge itself. First, it was a boy, little Sammy Tate, who went missing while playing near the tracks. His mum found his shoe by the mine's old fence, but no tracks, no trace. Then a hunter, Eli Pratt, disappeared with his rifle still slung over his shoulder, found leaning against a tree like he'd set it down and walked off into nothing. By Christmas, half the town had fled. Those who stayed locked doors tight, whispering about the lights and the voices. A reporter from Louisville, a gutsy woman named Margaret Hayes, rolled in to dig up the truth. She interviewed everyone, miners, widows, even kids, piecing together a story too wild to print. In her notes, later found in a museum archive, she wrote, "Hollow Ridge isn't just haunted. Something's alive down there, something old, angry, and awake. It's taking people, and no one knows why." Margaret stayed a week, snapping photos of the lights with her clunky camera. She caught them on film, blurry white blobs hovering over the snow. Her last entry, dated December 30th, read, "Heard the whispers myself tonight. They're calling names, mine included. I'm leaving tomorrow." She didn't. Her car was found abandoned on the road out, keys in the ignition, her notebook. On the seat, No sign of Margaret, just like the others. The vanishing slowed after that, but they never stopped. Over the decades, a hiker here, a teenager there, always near those cursed tracks or the sealed mine. Locals swore the light still glowed on moonless nights, and if you stood quiet, you'd hear the whispers faint but real rising from the ground. In 1975, a college kid with a tape recorder caught something, scratchy voices saying, "Help us, stay away." He sold the tape to a radio station, but it vanished from their files a week later. Today, Hollow Ridge is a ghost town, literally. The shacks are rotted, the church caved in, and the mine's steel door is rusted shut, but people still talk. Truckers on the highway nearby claim they see lights darting through the trees. Campers hear whispers, names of folks long dead. A park ranger in 2010 found a child's drawing scratched into a rock near the site, stick figures with glowing eyes, holding hands underground. No one knows who left it. The official story? A cave-in killed those miners, and the rest is hysteria. But the files don't lie. No bodies were ever found, not one. And those lights, those voices, they're still out there, caught in photos, recordings, and nightmares. Scientists say it's swamp gas or echoes from the rock. Paranoid folks call it aliens or demons. Me? I've read the reports, the interviews, the faded letters from widows begging for answers. I think something woke up in that mine. Something that doesn't rest, doesn't forgive, and doesn't let go. So what happened to the 12 miners? To Sammy, Eli, Margaret, and the others? Where did they go? The truth's buried in Hollow Ridge, locked in the dark with whatever's whispering. Down there. Maybe it's waiting for someone dumb enough to dig too deep, to listen too close. Could be you, standing by those tracks, hearing your name on the wind. Will you run, or will you vanish too? This is the Vanishing of Hollow Ridge, an unsolved mystery that's real, raw, and rotting in the hills of Kentucky. Sleep tight, because those whispers don't stop. They're out there right now, calling for someone new.